My daughter-in-law talked down to me like a child. So I acted like a child and accidentally donated her prized art collection to a daycare. Hello and welcome. I'm so very glad you're here today. Please, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. It means the world to me to know where you're joining from. Your presence is a great strength. Now settle in and let me tell you what they pushed me to do. My name is Harriet Vance, and for 72 years, the world has known me to be a woman of considerable patience. It's a patience born of the low-country soil, nurtured in the quiet, book-dusted aisles of a university library, and steeped in the rich, salt-laced air of Beaufort, South Carolina. My home, a sturdy two-story house that has belonged to the Vances for 3 generations, stands as a testament to this patience. Its porch, wide and welcoming, has weathered hurricanes. Its floors have borne the weight of sorrow and the joyful stomps of celebration. Every object within its walls holds a story, a connection to a life lived with intention. The sweetgrass baskets woven by my grandmother's hands, the worn copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God on my nightstand, the cast iron skillet in the kitchen, seasoned with decades of family meals. This house, paid for and deeply loved, was my kingdom. A kingdom of quiet dignity. My life in Beaufort was a carefully curated tapestry of familiar comforts. Mornings were for tending the garden, my fingers deep in the dark, rich soil, coaxing life from the earth just as my mother and her mother before her had done. Afternoons were for reading, the words of Black poets and historians my constant companions. Evenings were for sitting on my porch, a glass of sweet tea in hand, listening to the symphony of cicadas and tree frogs that served as the soundtrack to a low-country night. It was a peaceful existence, one I had earned after 40 years as the head librarian at the local university, a place where I had guided generations of students through the labyrinth of human knowledge. I was a widow, yes, but I was not lonely. My life was full, rich with history, community, and the deep, abiding peace of self-sufficiency. This peace was shattered, as it often was, by a telephone call from Atlanta. It was my son David. At 46, David was a success by every modern metric. A brilliant software engineer, he had climbed the corporate ladder with an almost ruthless efficiency, and his life, shared with his wife Simone, was a testament to his ambition. His voice on the phone was the one he always used when he wanted something from me. A smooth, carefully modulated blend of filial affection and gentle urgency. "Mama," he began, the single word already carrying the weight of his request. "How are you doing down there?" "I'm doing just fine, son," I replied, my eyes drifting to the garden where my prize-winning tomatoes were ripening on the vine. "The garden's coming in nicely. Thinking of putting up some preserves next week." "That's great, Mama, that's really great," he said, the speed of his words betraying his impatience. "Listen, the reason I'm calling. Simone and I were talking. We've got that big charity gala coming up in a few weeks and we'll be so busy. We were thinking it would be wonderful if you came up to stay for a while. A good long visit. You haven't been up since Christmas." I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. A visit to David and Simone's home was not the relaxing family getaway he made it out to be. It was an exercise in navigating a foreign territory, a world so sterile and so devoid of warmth that it made my teeth ache. Their house, a sprawling glass and steel monstrosity in a gated community in Buckhead, was less a home and more a museum of modern anxieties. Every surface was white or gray, every piece of furniture an uncomfortable geometric statement, every room echoing with a profound and unsettling emptiness. "David, that's a long drive for an old woman," I demurred, already knowing it was a losing battle. "Nonsense, you're as spry as ever," he chuckled. "And you know Simone worries about you being down there all by yourself. It would put her mind at ease. Please, Mama. For me." And there was the final, unanswerable move in our conversational chess match. For me. I had sacrificed too much for this boy, loved him too fiercely to deny him when he put it that way. I sighed, the sound a small puff of defeat against the backdrop of my tranquil evening. "All right, son. For you. Let me get my things in order." A week later, I was navigating the frantic 8-lane chaos of Atlanta traffic, my sturdy old Buick a stark contrast to the gleaming Teslas and Porsches that zipped around me. I arrived at their gated community, stated my name to a disembodied voice through an intercom, and waited as a massive wrought iron gate swung slowly open, granting me access to a world of manicured perfection. Simone was waiting for me at the front door, a vision in beige linen. Her smile was perfectly placed, but it never quite reached her eyes. At 44, Simone was a woman who had curated her life as meticulously as she curated her art collection. She was a private art consultant, a job that involved advising Atlanta's new money tech millionaires on what expensive, minimalist pieces to hang on their walls to signify their cultural superiority. "Harriet, you made it," she chirped, her voice pitched a little too high, a little too slow, as if she were speaking to a child or a particularly dim-witted tourist. She took my arm, her grip surprisingly firm, and guided me into the cavernous, white foyer. "Let me help you. I know that long drive must have been so confusing for you." I bit back the retort that I had been driving for nearly 60 years and had successfully navigated cross-country trips long before her GPS was a twinkle in a satellite's eye. "The drive was fine, Simone. It's good to see you." David emerged from a hallway, already tapping at his phone. He gave me a perfunctory hug, the scent of expensive cologne and corporate stress clinging to him. "Mama, welcome. Glad you're here." The house was even colder than I remembered. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that felt suitable for storing meat, and the silence was broken only by the faint, electronic hum of unseen technology. My sensible suitcase, with its slightly worn handle, looked deeply out of place on the polished concrete floor. "Let's get you settled in," Simone said, herding me towards the guest wing. "We've put you in the downstairs suite so you don't have to worry about the stairs. We know how tricky they can be." The tour, as always, was a performance. Simone pointed out things as if I were suffering from a severe memory impairment. "And here's the kitchen. Remember, the refrigerator is over here. And this is the remote for the television. It's a little complicated, but I'm sure David can show you how to work it later." Slowly. The final stop on this tour of condescension was the main living area, a vast two-story room with a wall of glass overlooking a sterile, perfectly landscaped backyard. The walls were adorned with Simone's prized art collection. To my eyes, it was a collection of expensive jokes. One canvas was entirely white with a single, barely perceptible gray line down the middle. Another was a large black square. A third was a series of perfectly spaced red dots. Simone stood before the all-white canvas, her hands clasped in an attitude of reverence. "Isn't it magnificent?" she breathed. "This is by a very important German artist. It's about the deconstruction of form." She turned to me, her head tilted with that infuriating, patronizing sympathy. "It's all very intellectual, you see. It's about ideas, not just pretty pictures. A bit different from your, crafts." She gestured vaguely, a dismissive flick of her wrist that was meant to encompass the sweetgrass baskets, the handmade quilts, the vibrant folk art that filled my own home. My crafts. The work of my ancestors' hands, the tangible soul of my heritage, reduced to a quaint, unsophisticated hobby. I looked at the sterile white canvas, a piece that had likely cost more than my entire house. I looked at Simone's smug, self-satisfied face. And I looked at my son, David, who stood by, nodding in agreement, a stranger in his own mother's presence. In that moment, standing in the cold, white heart of their perfect, empty life, I felt a familiar patience begin to fray. A different feeling, something colder and sharper, began to take its place. I smiled, a slow, sweet smile that didn't reach my eyes. "It's very clean, dear," I said, my voice as soft as cotton. The foundation had been laid. Simone believed I was a simple-minded old woman, a relic to be managed and tolerated. And I, a woman who had catalogued the entirety of human folly and genius in the Dewey Decimal System, decided then and there that I would not disabuse her of that notion. In fact, I would lean into it. I would let her build the cage of her own assumptions around me, bar by condescending bar. And then, when she least expected it, I would show her just how much of a child I could be. The first few days of my extended stay at what I privately called the mausoleum settled into a predictable, soul-crushing routine. My life, once my own, was now managed by Simone's suffocating brand of care. My mornings, which I usually spent with my hands in the soil, were now spent in the guest suite, where Simone would bring me a breakfast tray. "Just a little something to start your day," she'd trill, presenting me with a bowl of bland oatmeal and a glass of orange juice in a thick plastic cup. A child's cup. "I'm perfectly capable of getting my own breakfast, Simone," I said on the second morning, my voice even. "Oh, I know," she said, patting my hand with that infuriatingly light touch. "But it's no trouble. And this way we don't have to worry about you trying to figure out the coffee machine. It's terribly complicated. All those buttons. The house, I soon discovered, had been Harriet-proofed. Sharp corners on the minimalist coffee table were now covered with soft rubber guards. A child gate, a literal honest-to-God baby gate, was sometimes placed at the top of the main staircase, just in case you get turned around at night. Simone explained with a bright, false smile. We wouldn't want you to take a tumble. My son, David, was a ghost in his own home, disappearing into his home office before sunrise and emerging only for dinner, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone. He seemed utterly oblivious to the quiet campaign of humiliation being waged against his mother. Or more likely he chose to be. David had always avoided conflict, preferring a path of least resistance that, in this case, led directly through his mother's dignity. When I tried to bring it up with him one evening, he just looked uncomfortable. Mama, Simone is just trying to help, he mumbled, not looking up from his plate of quinoa and grilled asparagus. She's a worrier. You know how she is. She just wants to make sure you're safe and comfortable. David, she put a note on the microwave that says, "Press start to heat food," in large block letters. I have a master's degree in library science. I think I can operate a microwave. He just sighed, a long weary sound. Just try to get along, Mama. For me. The campaign of infantilization escalated. Simone began speaking about me in the third person even when I was sitting right there. She needs her nap now, she'd say to a visiting neighbor as I sat on the sofa, wide awake, reading a biography of Zora Neale Hurston. She gets so tuckered out by the afternoon. She would help me with my phone, grabbing it from my hands and tapping at the screen with exaggerated slowness. See? This is how you open your emails. Just press the little envelope. Easy peasy. Each incident was a small, sharp jab, a tiny tear in the fabric of my self-worth. I was no longer Harriet Vance, retired librarian, matriarch, keeper of stories. I was a collection of perceived frailties, a walking, talking list of things I could no longer be trusted to do. My knowledge was dismissed, my life experience ignored. I was being systematically erased, replaced by a caricature of a helpless old woman that existed only in Simone's mind. The breaking point, the moment the last thread of my low-country patience finally snapped, came on a Saturday evening. Simone was hosting a small, exclusive get-together for a few of her art world friends. It was not a party. It was a networking event, a chance for her to hold court and solidify her status as Buckhead's premier arbiter of taste. The guests were all versions of Simone. Women in expensive, shapeless clothing and men with severe haircuts and an air of profound boredom. They drifted through the living room, sipping champagne and making quiet, critical pronouncements about the art on the walls. I had been instructed, in that gentle, non-negotiable way of Simone's, to just relax on the sofa and enjoy the company. I sat, a silent, invisible observer in my simple but elegant navy blue dress, watching the parade of performative intellectualism. The conversation was a stream of pretentious jargon about negative space, postmodern irony, and the liminality of the artist's praxis. At one point, a woman with a severe asymmetrical bob haircut paused in front of a particularly baffling sculpture, a twisted piece of rusted metal that looked like it had fallen off a tractor. "The tension here is just extraordinary," she declared. "The artist is clearly commenting on the decay of industrial capitalism." I couldn't help myself. A small, unladylike snort escaped my lips. The woman turned to me, her perfectly plucked eyebrows raised in question. Feeling a sudden reckless urge to pierce the bubble of their self-importance, I decided to speak. "You know," I began, my voice clear and steady, "that piece of metal reminds me of a story my grandfather used to tell. He was a sharecropper down in the Sea Islands and he had this old mule named Bess. One day the plow broke and a piece of it looked just like that thing there went flying off into the cotton field." I saw a flicker of genuine interest in the woman's eyes. She was leaning in, curious. But before I could continue, Simone was there, swooping in like a hawk. She placed a hand on my arm, her fingers pinching slightly, a silent, urgent command to stop. "Oh, Harriet, what a sweet story," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear. She smiled at the other guests, a conspiratorial, apologetic smile. "She has so many of these little folk tales. It's just darling." Then she turned back to me, her smile tightening into a mask of pure steel. She patted my hand, a gesture that was both a dismissal and a threat. That's a lovely story for later. The adults are talking now. The adults are talking now. The words hung in the air, echoing in the sudden, profound silence. The little circle of guests shuffled their feet, their eyes darting away embarrassed for me. I felt a hot, sickening wave of shame wash over me, so intense it was almost dizzying. She had done it. She had finally succeeded in reducing me to a toddler, babbling nonsensically at the grown-ups' table. In that single public moment she had stripped me of my history, my voice, and my dignity, all with a pat on the hand and a syrupy, dismissive smile. I looked at her, my daughter-in-law, standing there in her expensive beige dress, her face a mask of triumphant control. I looked at the faces of her friends, their pity and discomfort a fresh layer of humiliation. And I felt the last vestiges of Harriet Vance, the patient, long-suffering mother-in-law, wither and die. In its place, something new and dangerous was born. A cold, quiet, and utterly ferocious fury. An anger so pure and so clarifying it felt like a baptism. I had spent weeks being treated like a child. I had been patient. I had been polite. I had held my tongue. No more. A slow, serene smile spread across my face. I met Simone's gaze, and for the first time, I let her see the flicker of fire behind my eyes. She wanted a child. Fine. Children are not known for their patience or their good judgment. Children are known for making messes. And I, Harriet Vance, decided in that moment that I was going to make the biggest, most expensive, and most beautifully orchestrated mess she had ever seen. The game was on. And I was going to play it by her rules. The rage that was born in me during that humiliating party was not a hot, explosive thing. It was a cold fire, the kind that burns with a quiet, blue intensity, refining and purifying my resolve. The next morning I awoke not with a hangover of shame, but with a crystalline, diamond-hard clarity of purpose. Simone had drawn the battle lines. She saw me as a simple-minded child incapable of understanding her sophisticated world. Very well. I would use that perception as my shield and my sword. My 40 years as a librarian had taught me one thing above all else. The most powerful weapon in the world is information, and the key to victory is meticulous organization. My revenge would not be a messy, emotional outburst. It would be a research project. A perfectly executed, flawlessly documented act of calculated mischief. My performance began that very Sunday. I found Simone in the living room, admiring her all-white canvas. I approached her with a shuffling, hesitant gait that I had practiced in my room. I put on a look of deep, furrowed confusion, an expression I had seen on the faces of countless freshmen struggling with the card catalog. "Simone dear," I began, my voice soft and slightly quavering. "I was just looking at this painting again. It's so big." Simone turned, her expression one of weary patience. "Yes, Harriet. It's a significant piece. But, why is it all white?" I asked, my head tilted in feigned innocence. Did the artist forget to buy the other colors? Or did he run out of time? I could see the internal struggle in her eyes. The desire to dismiss me outright versus the urge to lecture, to flaunt her superior knowledge. The urge to lecture won. "No, Harriet," she sighed, launching into a familiar, patronizing explanation. "The artist is making a statement about the nature of perception itself. The absence of color forces the viewer to confront the canvas as an object, to consider the texture, the light, the very concept of what a painting is." I let her talk, nodding along with a vacant, glassy-eyed expression, interjecting with helpful questions like, "So, it's supposed to be empty? And my friend Mildred's grandson, he's only 5, he paints lovely pictures. With lots of colors. He likes blue." Each inane question was a small, deliberate act of psychological warfare. I was reinforcing her narrative of my senility, lulling her into a state of absolute certainty about my harmlessness. I became a master of the role, asking her to explain the angry-looking black square, the spotty red dot painting, and the rusty, broken sculpture. With each condescending explanation she offered, she was unknowingly arming me with the provenance and inflated importance of each piece I planned to disappear. My primary tool in this operation was the tablet David had bought me. Simone had insisted on giving me a tutorial, a painfully slow and patronizing affair where she had shown me, with exaggerated finger taps, how to turn it on and open the web browser. "It's for your little games, Harriet," she'd said. and you can look at pictures of your friends from the senior center. Now, in the quiet of my guest suite, that tablet became my command center. My fingers, which Simone believed were too clumsy for technology, flew across the screen. I was a librarian again, diving into the digital stacks. My search terms were precise: Atlanta charities, underfunded schools Atlanta, donations for children's centers. I bypassed the large corporate-style charities that would have too much bureaucracy. I was looking for something small, local, and overwhelmed. A place where a sudden large donation of wall art would be accepted with gratitude and a minimum of awkward questions. It didn't take long to find the perfect candidate: the Little Sprouts Academy. It was a daycare and after-school center located in a working-class neighborhood in southwest Atlanta, a world away from the manicured lawns of Buckhead. Their website was simple, heartfelt, and full of typos. The About Us page featured a picture of the director, a tired-looking but kind-faced black woman named Mrs. Jackson. The wish list page was a heartbreaking litany of needs: new books, art supplies, playground equipment, and there it was, the magic phrase: colorful and inspiring wall art to brighten our classrooms and inspire our children's creativity. A slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across my face. It was perfect. The juxtaposition was a masterpiece of poetic justice. Simone's cold, sterile million-dollar statements on the deconstruction of form were about to become inspiring wall art for a group of 4-year-olds. The irony was so delicious it was almost a physical taste. The next phase of the plan was logistics. I researched donation pickup services in the Atlanta area. I found several that offered free pickups for charitable donations. I read their FAQs, memorizing their procedures. I knew I would need to be convincing. I would need a story. I spent the next few days rehearsing my role. In the mirror, I practiced my confused but well-meaning old lady voice. It was a delicate balance, dotty enough to be believable but lucid enough to sign the paperwork. I was no longer Harriet Vance, vengeful mother-in-law. I was Mrs. Vance, a sweet, slightly muddled grandmother who just wanted to do something nice. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Simone, in a moment of supreme hubris, announced that she and David would be flying to Aspen for a long weekend. "It's a very exclusive art fair," she explained to me as if I were a child being told the grown-ups were going on a trip. "We'll be back on Monday. Now, I've left a list of emergency numbers on the fridge for you. And I've pre-made some sandwiches. All you have to do is take them out. Don't try to use the stove, okay? The house would be empty. I would have an entire weekend." It was more than enough time. As they packed their bags, I gave them a flawless performance. I shuffled over to Simone, my face a mask of worry. "Now you two be safe," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "That's a long way to go. Do they have nice pictures there too?" "Yes, Harriet," Simone said, patting my shoulder. "They have very nice pictures. We'll be fine. Just try not to get into any trouble while we're gone." "Oh, I'll be good as gold," I promised, a beatific smile on my face. "I'll just stay here and be quiet." She looked at me, this simple, harmless old woman who couldn't be trusted with a stove, and she believed me. She had no idea that the child she was leaving behind was about to conduct a masterclass in creative deaccessioning. The stage was set. The actors were in place. All that was left was for the curtain to rise on my little play. The moment the Uber carrying David and Simone to the airport cleared the massive iron gates of the community, a profound and delicious silence settled over the house. It was the silence of opportunity. The cold, sterile air no longer felt oppressive. It felt like the calm, controlled atmosphere of an operating theater. And I, Harriet Vance, was the surgeon, preparing to excise a malignant arrogance. I did not rush. A librarian's work is methodical. I spent the rest of Friday afternoon making my final preparations. I walked through the cavernous living room, my tablet in hand, taking careful notes. I identified the 5 key pieces for donation: the all-white canvas, deconstruction number 7, the big black square, void study number 3, the canvas of red dots, chromatic progression in red, the twisted piece of rusted metal, urban decay triptych panel 1, and a small, baffling sculpture of 2 interlocking concrete blocks, duality. I cross-referenced them with the notes I had taken during Simone's condescending lectures, ensuring I had the correct, pretentious titles. This was important for the paperwork. Next, I composed my script. I knew I couldn't sound too polished or professional on the phone. I needed to be Harriet, the sweet, slightly confused grandmother Simone had so carefully molded in her own mind. On Saturday morning, I put on my favorite floral print dress, the one Simone secretly hated, calling it busy. I made myself a cup of strong tea, using the terribly complicated coffee machine with ease, and sat at the massive marble island in the kitchen. At precisely 9 a.m. I made the call. I had chosen a company called Giving Hands Movers, a local outfit whose website emphasized their friendly, community-focused service. A cheerful young man answered the phone. Giving Hands, this is Kevin. I took a deep breath and summoned my inner child. Oh, hello, dear, I began, my voice a soft, reedy flute. My name is Harriet Vance. I hope I've called the right place. My daughter-in-law, Simone, she's so busy, she asked me to arrange a little clear-out for her. A clear-out? Kevin asked. You mean a donation pickup? Yes, that's it. A donation. I chirped. He has all this art. And she said to me, Mother, this house is so cold. I want to give these old, stark decorations to a place that needs them. A place with children. She wants to make room for something more cheerful, you see. For the grandchildren. I added that last part for a touch of verisimilitude. That's wonderful. Kevin said, his voice warm. We can definitely help with that. What's the address? I gave him the Buckhead address and I could hear his surprise. Wow. And what exactly are we picking up? Oh, just a few pictures and a sculpture, I said airily. They're not very big. Just some old things she's tired of looking at. We're donating them to a little school, the Little Sprouts Academy. I gave him the daycare's name and address, knowing it would add a layer of legitimacy to the whole affair. We scheduled the pickup for that afternoon. Before hanging up, I added one final crucial touch. Now, dear, I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. My daughter-in-law is a very particular woman. She will need a proper receipt for her taxes. A formal donation receipt. Can you make sure the driver brings one? It must be made out to Simone Vance. She gets very cross if the paperwork isn't right. Absolutely, Mrs. Vance, Kevin promised. We'll have it all ready for you. I hung up the phone, my heart beating a steady, triumphant rhythm. The fuse was lit. At 2 o'clock, a large, slightly battered moving truck rumbled up the pristine cobblestone driveway, looking as out of place as I felt. 2 young men in matching blue t-shirts hopped out. They were big, brawny, and looked utterly bewildered to be in such an opulent neighborhood. I met them at the door, my face arranged in a mask of sweet, grandmotherly welcome. Hello, dears. Thank you so much for coming. I beamed. You're Mrs. Vance? The larger of the two asked, looking at a clipboard. I am, I said. Please come in, come in. The pieces are just in the living room. My daughter-in-law will be so pleased you're here. I led them into the living room. They stopped dead in their tracks, their eyes wide as they took in the scale of the art. The all-white canvas alone was nearly 10 feet long. Whoa, the smaller one whispered, looking at the black square. That's a lot of paint, isn't it? I said with a sad shake of my head. So gloomy. Simone wants something with flowers, I think. Much more cheerful. They looked at each other, a silent, professional communication passing between them. They were movers, not art critics. Their job was to move what they were told to move. With practiced efficiency, they began carefully wrapping the canvases in thick moving blankets. They handled the twisted metal sculpture with a grunt of effort, and the 2 concrete blocks with confused resignation. As they worked, I hovered nearby, playing my part to perfection. I offered them lemonade in the plastic cups Simone had left for me. I told them a long, rambling, and entirely fabricated story about my son David's childhood finger-painting phase. I was the picture of a harmless, dotty old woman, completely out of her depth but trying her best to be helpful. Within an hour, the living room walls were shockingly, gloriously bare. The absence of the art left behind ghostly rectangles on the white walls, a visible record of the crime. The room, once cold and pretentious, now just looked empty and sad. The lead mover approached me with the clipboard. Okay, ma'am, that's everything. I just need you to sign here. He then handed me a separate, official-looking form. And here is the donation receipt made out to Simone Vance, just like you asked. I took the pen, my hand trembling just enough to be convincing. I signed the work order. Then I folded the donation receipt, the golden ticket, the legal masterstroke of my entire plan, and tucked it safely into my dress pocket. I walked them to the door as they loaded the last piece onto the truck. "Thank you again, boys," I said, pressing a $20 bill into each of their hands. "You've been such a help. You're making a lot of little children very happy today." They grinned, pocketed the tips, and climbed back into their truck. I stood on the porch, waving with a feeble grandmotherly flourish as the truck pulled away, carrying millions of dollars of deconstructed form to its new life as a finger-painting canvas. I closed the door, the click of the latch echoing in the now barren house. I walked back into the living room and stood in the center of the space, surveying my handiwork. The walls were bare. The silence was absolute. It was the most beautiful, most satisfying sight I had ever seen. I had not raised my voice. I had not thrown a single tantrum. I had simply done what any good, obedient child would do. I had cleaned up my room. And now, all that was left was to wait for Mommy and Daddy to come home and see what a good girl I had been. I spent the rest of the weekend in a state of quiet, blissful anticipation. The mausoleum, now stripped of its soulless art, felt lighter, almost breathable. I moved about the house with a newfound sense of ownership. I made myself proper meals on the stove, leaving the pre-made sandwiches to wither in the refrigerator. I played my Gullah spirituals on the high-tech sound system, the rich, soulful voices of my ancestors filling the cold, empty spaces, and I imagined, seeping into the very walls. I was at peace. It was the deep, satisfying peace of a mission accomplished, a trap perfectly set. David and Simone were due back on Monday afternoon. I prepared for their arrival as one prepares for a coming storm. I tidied the house, ensuring there was no evidence of the movers' presence. I put on a simple, unassuming dress. I arranged my face into a mask of placid innocence. And then I sat in the armchair in the living room, the one facing the now gloriously bare walls, and I waited. I heard the crunch of their car on the cobblestone driveway, the beep of the alarm system being disarmed, the click of the front door. "We're home," David called out, his voice weary from travel. "Harriet." Simone's voice followed, sharp and imperious. "Did everything go all right? No excitement, I hope?" I heard their footsteps on the polished concrete floor of the foyer. And then they entered the living room. The silence that followed was a thing of beauty. It was not a peaceful silence. It was a dense, heavy, vacuum-sealed silence, the kind that precedes a sonic boom. I watched them, my hands folded calmly in my lap. David stopped dead, his carry-on bag slipping from his grasp and thudding to the floor. His mouth fell open, his eyes wide with disbelief as he scanned the empty walls. But it was Simone's reaction that I will treasure for the rest of my days. It was a slow-motion symphony of horror. Her face, already pale from the flight, seemed to drain of all color, leaving behind a waxy, translucent mask. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, darted from one ghostly rectangle on the wall to the next. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth, not to stifle a scream, but as if to physically hold her own jaw in place. She made a small, strangled sound, a noise somewhere between a gasp and a death rattle. "What?" she whispered, her voice a reedy, unrecognizable thing. "Where?" She turned to me, her eyes finally landing on my placid form in the armchair. The confusion in her expression curdled instantly into a look of pure, unadulterated venom. "You," she hissed, the word a viper's strike. "What did you do?" I blinked, feigning a gentle, sleepy confusion as if being roused from a nap. "Simone dear, you're back. Did you have a nice trip?" I asked, my voice as sweet as molasses. "Don't you dear me, you old woman," she shrieked, her carefully constructed facade of cool sophistication shattering into a million pieces. "The art. Where is the art?" David finally found his voice. "Mama? What happened? Was there a robbery?" He was already fumbling for his phone, his mind going to the most logical, albeit incorrect, conclusion. "Oh heavens no, not a robbery," I said, my eyes wide with feigned alarm. "Don't be silly, David. I was here the whole time." I rose slowly from my chair, a picture of frail innocence. I walked towards Simone, my face a mask of concern. "I did a good thing, dear. Surprise. You're always talking about giving back, about charity. And you said you wanted to get rid of these old, gloomy decorations." Simone stared at me, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her mind clearly unable to process my words. "Get rid? What are you talking about?" "I helped. I announced, my voice full of triumphant, misguided pride. I found a lovely little school, a place for poor children. They had a wish list and they needed pictures for their walls. So I called some nice young men and they came and took all of this clutter, away to the school. To inspire the children. Isn't that wonderful? I beamed at her, a perfect, beatific smile. I had delivered my lines flawlessly. The absurdity of my explanation, the sheer mind-boggling gap between the reality of the situation and my childlike interpretation of it, had stunned her into a momentary sputtering paralysis. You gave it away? David stammered, his face a comical mask of horror. Mama, that art was worth millions. Millions? I said, my brow furrowed in confusion. Don't be silly, son. It was just a bunch of empty canvases and some rusty metal. Why would anyone pay millions for that? This was the moment Simone finally exploded. You imbecile, she screamed, the sound echoing through the cavernous room. She lunged towards me, her hands curled into claws, and for a moment I thought she might actually strike me. David, to his credit, grabbed her arm, holding her back. Simone, stop, he yelled. She ruined us. Simone sobbed, her voice a raw, ragged sound of pure despair. She did it on purpose. She's not a child, she's a monster. Simone dear, what a terrible thing to say, I said, my voice full of hurt. I let a single, perfect tear roll down my cheek. I was only trying to help. You told me yourself that I don't understand these things. I thought you would be proud of me. And then for the masterstroke. I reached into my dress pocket and pulled out the folded donation receipt. I held it out to her, my hand trembling slightly. And I was so careful, dear, I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. I even got the paperwork for your taxes just like a grown-up. It's all official. Simone snatched the paper from my hand. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the words. She saw the name of the moving company. She saw the itemized list of her priceless art, described as various wall hangings and sculptures. She saw the name of the recipient, the Little Sprouts Academy. And she saw her own name, Simone Vance, listed as the generous donor. The sight of that legally binding document, the tangible proof of my charitable accident, seemed to suck all the air from her lungs. The fight went out of her. Her shoulders slumped. The shrieking rage was replaced by a look of utter, hollow defeat. She knew in that instant that she was trapped. We have to go there, she whispered, her voice a dead, flat monotone. We have to go there now and get it back. She turned, a woman possessed, and marched out of the room, David stumbling after her, still babbling about insurance and lawyers. I stood alone in the quiet, empty living room. I was no longer playing a part. The serene smile on my face was genuine. The trap had been sprung. The prey was now running, panicked and bleeding, directly towards the final, most beautiful part of the snare. The public part. The part where the whole world would see what a generous, community-minded soul my daughter-in-law truly was. The drive to the Little Sprouts Academy in southwest Atlanta must have been a masterclass in silent, seething fury. I of course was not invited. I remained at the house, a serene queen in her conquered castle, and pictured the scene. Simone, her face a thunderous mask of rage, and David, wringing his hands and likely trying to calculate the financial fallout, speeding through the city in their luxury SUV, a vehicle so out of place in the daycare's neighborhood that it might as well have been a spaceship. They would have arrived at the low brick building to find a scene of joyous, creative chaos. The daycare's main playroom, once a drab beige box, had been transformed into a vibrant, if unconventional, art gallery. Simone's prized deconstruction number 7, the 10-foot-long all-white canvas that was meant to force the viewer to confront the abjectness of the canvas, was now confronting a glorious explosion of color. The children, armed with pots of tempera paint, had used their hands, feet, and even their faces to create a magnificent multicolored mural across its entire surface. It was a riot of primary colored handprints, glitter glue, and joyful, unrestrained streaks of paint. The statement on absence had become a testament to pure, unadulterated presence. The big black square, void study number 3, had been lovingly adorned with macaroni, dried beans, and cotton balls, transforming it into a night sky collage. The red dot painting now had smiley faces drawn inside each dot with a black marker. The twisted metal sculpture had been draped with colorful yarn and pipe cleaners, looking for all the world like an avant-garde Christmas tree. But the true masterpiece, the piece de resistance of my entire operation, was what had become of the duality sculpture. The two interlocking concrete blocks, once a stark statement on architectural tension, were now serving as the foundation for a magnificent, sprawling Lego castle. Simone and David would have burst through the door, their faces a mixture of horror and desperation, only to be met by the calm, steady gaze of Mrs. Jackson, the daycare's director. She was a tall, formidable woman in her late 50s, with kind eyes that could turn to steel in an instant. She would have been holding a toddler on her hip, a toddler with bright blue paint on his cheek. "Can I help you?" she would have asked, her voice polite but firm. This is our art." Simone would have shrieked, gesturing wildly at the paint-splattered, glitter-bombed remnants of her collection. "There's been a terrible mistake. We need it back. Now." Mrs. Jackson's eyebrows would have risen slowly. "A mistake? I don't think so. I have a legally binding donation receipt, signed on behalf of a Mrs. Simone Vance. A very generous woman, I must say. Our children have been so inspired." She would have then produced her copy of the receipt. The sight of that document, the legal finality of it, would have been the final nail in Simone's coffin. "But it's worth millions." David would have stammered, his voice pleading. You can't just let the children destroy it." And this is where Mrs. Jackson, a woman who had dedicated her life to nurturing children in an underfunded corner of the city, would have fixed them with a look of profound, righteous indignation. "Destroy it," she would have said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "My children haven't destroyed anything. They have made this art better. They have filled it with joy and with life, something it was clearly lacking. This art was donated to this school. It belongs to these children now. And you are not taking it from them." The checkmate was complete. They were trapped in a public relations nightmare of their own making. What were they going to do? Call the police on a daycare? Forcibly rip the paint-covered canvases from the walls as a dozen toddlers wept? Sue a nonprofit for accepting a donation that was made, legally and officially, in their own name? They were the rich, arrogant one-percenters from Buckhead, trying to take art back from poor, underprivileged children. The story wrote itself. The optics were catastrophic. They had no choice but to retreat, utterly and completely defeated. They would have driven back to their sterile mansion in a silence thick with the ashes of their arrogance. The house, with its bare walls, would no longer be a symbol of their success, but a permanent, echoing monument to their spectacular humiliation. I did not stay to witness the fallout. My work was done. The next morning, while they were likely on the phone with a lawyer who was explaining the legal definition of an irrevocable gift, I packed my sensible suitcase. I called a taxi, refusing David's hollow, mumbled offer of a ride. I left a simple handwritten note on the marble kitchen island. It read, "Thank you for the visit. I've decided to go home now. Do be more careful with your things. Harriet." The 600-mile drive back to Beaufort was the most peaceful journey of my life. The chaos of Atlanta traffic faded in my rearview mirror, replaced by the calming, familiar landscape of the Lowcountry. I played my gospel hymns, my voice joining in with the chorus, full and strong. I returned to my house, my kingdom. I walked through the rooms, touching the familiar objects, the sweetgrass baskets, the worn books. I breathed in the scent of home, a scent of history, of dignity, of peace. My revenge was complete. It wasn't in the financial loss they had suffered, though that was considerable. It was in the lesson I had taught them. I had used Simone's own prejudice, her own condescension, as the very tool of her undoing. She had wanted to treat me like a child, so I had acted like one, and in doing so had exposed the childishness of her own vanity. I had not simply destroyed her art collection. I had, with a single methodical act of mischief, foreclosed on her entire worldview. Me. I remained where I had always been, in my quiet, paid-for home in South Carolina, a woman of patience, a keeper of stories, my dignity polished and restored, shining brighter than any empty, all-white canvas ever could. And that, I can tell you, was a masterpiece.